Hi, everyone. I hope that this message finds you safe and warm, and that the winter weather is allowing you time to rest rather than causing you stress. It's a real gift that we're able to connect virtually, even when the weather prevents us from being together in person. I invite you to take a look at our website and our e-news for more information about all the things that are happening at Westside. There's a lot going on right now. And if this is your first time visiting us, please fill out an online visitor card to let us know that you're here and ways that we might be able to serve. Today, I want to share some thoughts with you about the idea of being called. We can call others all sorts of things, both positive and negative, welcoming and separating. We can be called all sorts of things. We can have spiritual and vocational callings. We can call one another out or call one another in. Calling is a way that we point language at one another and even at ourselves in ways that can be life-denying or life-affirming. So in our services, we begin with the sound of the Himalayan bowl, which sings as a way to call us into the present moment, to invite us, and into full awareness of our bodies and hearts. This week, we're going to begin with some sad news. I am sad to say that we need to light a candle of loss today for someone in our community. Many of you know the family of Jesse and Ben Tolar and their son Gideon, who attended Westside quite a bit over the last few years. Sadly, Ben died last weekend, and we are going to light a candle of care and concern for Jess and their children as they deal with this incredible loss. As Ben was the sole provider for their family, the family has created a GoFundMe account, which you can access through our Westside social media if you want to help support them in a material way. But even more than that, let us all be sending our thoughts, prayers, our love, and our wishes to Jesse and the children to be able to make it through this difficult time with all the support and care that they need. The Unitarian Universalist chalice, which we light at the beginning of our services, is a symbol of holding one another in warmth and care as we are holding Jess and their children right now. The chalice is also a symbol of collectively searching for truth and meaning, and of keeping the spark and passion for justice alive in our hearts and in our congregations. This week, we're going to light the chalice with words from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. These words come from a speech that Dr. King gave in April of 1967. It was at a meeting of clergy concerned about the Vietnam War. In the speech, he outlined the importance of speaking out rather than being silent in times of great crisis. And he uses the word calling repeatedly to outline his perspective and his charge to his colleagues. The recent statement of your committee, he said to this gathering of clergy and laymen concerned about Vietnam, the recent statement of your executive committee are the sentiments of my own heart, and I found myself in full accord when I read its opening lines. A time comes when silence is betrayal. Dr. King said that time has come for us. Some of us who have already begun to break the silence of the night have found that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony, but we must speak. We must speak with all the humility that is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak. The calling to speak. This is something many people from all sorts of different social and political perspectives are feeling right now, quite deeply. But what does it mean to be called to speak or called to anything? And what does it mean to call one another in the many ways that we can do that? In recent weeks, we've been talking about the power of words, of how they change from generation to generation, from culture to culture, from context to context. One of the most important phrases my young adult children have taught me lately is code switching. A code switching is something we all do. When we change the way we speak from formal, say, for example, the way I talk at work or in a professional setting, when I change that to my more casual conversation, when I'm with friends, that's code switching. When we use one kind of vernacular in a technical setting, say when we're talking about computers with other computer geeks, or when we use a particular vernacular with our football buddies watching the Vols, and then we change that when we go into a different setting, say, for example, how we talk to our church friends, that's code switching. And often when we code switch, there are different rules or expectations about what it is acceptable to say, how it is acceptable to name or call ourselves in each other, and what the rules are of the relationship. For example, someone in the LGBTQIA plus community might just use the word queer to refer to themselves and their loved ones within the queer community when they're in that setting. But then they might use very different language in a more mixed social or political environment to refer to the same people for themselves. Acronyms play a huge role in code switching. Knowing what different acronyms means will give you access to a wide range of communities and social groups. Just for example, think about the word you. When we know what you means, we have access to all kinds of different assumptions and social networks than before we really know what it is to even say you, and we don't know what those letters stand for. Unitarian, universal. Here's another example. Recently in a sermon, I used the word ebonics, which was actually a colloquial name for a movement in the 1990s, mostly in California, to legitimize the colloquial speech of African Americans. So when I was talking about that with other people after the service, particularly younger people than myself, they said, "Oh, you mean like AAVE?" Which I didn't know what that meant. We then had a conversation about the meaning of the acronym, which stands for African American Vernacular English. This is a very different phrase or understanding than my much older socially located word ebonics, right? Different social assumptions are rooted in those different ways of expressing something similar, different understandings of culture and history and society are embedded in those two different phrases. I got the message clearly from not knowing what AAVE stood for, that I had missed out on a whole bunch of social content, cultural content that I needed to learn about. So what we call things, how we refer to things, and particularly how we name things, reveals a lot of unspoken and largely unconscious assumptions about our reality. And unpacking the ways we call things can open windows into a much deeper understanding of ourselves, each other, and our world. I remember once asking a Native American professor I was working with, this was in grad school, what he preferred to be called. I said, "Do you prefer to be called Indian or Native American?" And his answer was profound for me. He said, "Well, in academic settings here, I call myself Native American. But at home on the reservation with my people, I call myself Indian." Isn't that a powerful, clarifying statement? How many of us have names or labels that we use for ourselves or for others that change depending on who we're talking to? How many of us would call certain people by labels at a distance that we would never call them in their presence or say to them directly? How about the names we call ourselves in our own heads when no one else can hear us? What we call ourselves and others matters because this calling is actually a directed relational way of naming our expectations and our assumptions about ourselves and one another. These names we call ourselves define relationships between us and the world. Whenever we say we're calling someone, just think of it as a verb. We mean that we are taking direct action towards another person, sometimes a situation, whether it's a phone call. I'm going to call my husband on the way home, or a judgment. She called him a traitor. Or even that old Southern hospitality visit. She called on him after church. In all these ways, to call is to point our words or actions directly at someone or something. So a calling establishes a relationship, and they come with expectations and boundaries and rules and limits. If I call my husband on the phone, I'm expecting communication. If I call someone an enemy or an idiot or a beloved, I'm defining a whole set of terms and parameters around the way we interact. If I call upon you for help or for an answer, I'm expecting something very particular in response. So calling is taking words to the next level. It's not just a flat, simple, this is the name I have for something. That word implies specific expectations and relationships. It's using specific words to define social groups, to define social norms, to define relationship boundaries. So Dr. King, in that 1967 talk, when he was talking to other clergy, described a wide range of callings he felt and that he felt defined by. And he was calling on his audience at the same time. He was, of course, relating to them as someone called as a religious leader, which he also assumed they were, because this was mostly clergy people. People called to some kind of religious or spiritual leadership, and thus responsible to the people they served directly in so many different ways. But he also said some interesting things about calling in other ways. He described how receiving the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, he received that as a calling that took him beyond national allegiance. And even beyond that, he said, beyond the calling of race or nation or creed is the vocation of what he called sonship and brotherhood, by which he was really referring to the brotherhood of humanity. And for that, he felt this. He said, we are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy. For no document, he said, from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers. So for Dr. King, there were these larger callings where he felt called to something. It was something that required a response. And isn't that true? Even when we casually call someone a name, for good or ill, or call them a descriptor, an adjective, friend or foe, positive or negative, we're setting up certain inevitable responses. And this brings us to another use of the word call. It brings us to the difference between calling someone out and calling someone in. So that former phrase, calling someone out, it's an older phrase, but not very old. It's only been around for, a few decades maybe. It's perhaps more familiar though. We call someone out when we basically tell them that their language or their behavior or their stance is problematic, unacceptable, and perhaps even harmful, dangerous. This phrase is probably most familiar to most of us in social justice work. When we have a commitment to a certain value or a way of doing things, and we call someone out, What we're doing is we're catching them violating the codes of our commitment. Now, after years of lots of people calling each other out publicly, socially, politically, culturally, in all kinds of ways, and also doing this in religious spheres, let me say that Unitarian Universalists have been super duper masters of calling people out in the past. After years of this calling out in our culture, we've begun to understand that this can cause more harm than good. People start thinking, maybe that's not as helpful as we would like it to be. We need an alternative. So you see that the reason for that is this: calling someone out actually casts them out. It makes someone feel shunned and shamed and rejected, as if they no longer belong in the community. So how do we name things that are problematic without calling people out or using words to cast people out of relationship? And this is where we started using the phrase calling each other in. To call someone in is different than to call them out. It's to invite them into deeper relationship and deeper reflection. Instead of saying, you're doing something wrong and you're bad, you should stop doing that, you should be ashamed of yourself, you've got to change. Instead of doing that, which is calling out, calling in is saying, hey, time out. Ouch. That felt upsetting or hurtful to me. I found what you just said problematic. Can we talk about it? To call one another in is to invite a completely different response. It is to invite someone with the expectation that our relationship will continue and perhaps even deepen if we go further into this conversation. It's really easy to call one another and ourselves names. It's really easy to push people away with our words, to call them out. To call them in is more complicated, maybe more messy, but absolutely creates a completely different possibility in our relationship. It's easy to take for granted how powerful these kinds of uses of words, the names we call each other, the ways we call each other in or out, it's really easy to take for granted the amount of power embedded in those speech acts. It's really easy to forget that we might be called to a higher action than it's easy to do. So I would invite us in this week after we celebrated the life of Dr. King to seek to use our words in ways that call forth a world like he did. Let us seek to use our words to call forth a world where we find the love that abides in each and every one of us deeper and stronger. Let us call for our own and others' open hearts and open minds. Let us call for actions that build a world of justice, peace, equity, and wellness for all beings. I'd like to close with words from Dr. King from that same speech. This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality, he said, a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all men. This oft misunderstood and misinterpreted concept, love he's referring to here, so readily dismissed as a weak and cowardly force, has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of all men, he said. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I am speaking of that force, Dr. King said, which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme and unifying principle of life. Let us then heed this call from Dr. King to live a powerful love that lifts us above name calling, above calling one another out, and into the realm of calling ourselves and one another into relationship, into community, into awakeness, and into being the best versions of ourselves that we can possibly be together. May it be so. Stay safe out there, everyone. Hold one another in deep care and connection in this world that is calling not only for your attention, but also for the incredible gift that is your unique presence and your unique possibility. See you soon.